Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I know it's right after lunch. I know you've all had long conversations until late last night, so thank you for being here. Welcome to this session on trying to have a discussion, all of us. We want a lot of questions from you on how funders can best support journalism. I'm Pierre Judot. I'm the Director of Portfolio of the International Fund for Public Interest Media. We're a newly created, independent, multilateral organization. We seek to respond to the existential economic crisis that many public interest media are facing in low and middle income countries. We're going to be launching officially in a couple of weeks on World Press Freedom Day. I won't tell more about the fund right now. I'm going to introduce the great panelists I have with me in a second, but before that, I want to introduce the conversation a little bit. This session is organized by the Journalism Funders Forum. The four foundations represented here are all members of the steering committee. The forum is a community of foundations that fund media across Europe. The forum is meant to do two things. It's meant to create a space for funders to have conversations on how to best support journalism in Europe and learn from each other. And it's meant to bring more funders to fund journalism on the continent. Today, we want to have an open conversation with you. We all, as funders, are very conscious that at times we can be a little isolated, that it's difficult to have a frank conversation on what's most needed in the field, what are some of the kind of practices that we have as funders that should be improved, or where we should think differently. So I'm hoping we're going to get a lot of questions from you. One way to think about it is to think about both what funders fund, like where is the money going? Is it really going to the kind of key challenges that are critical to make journalism stronger today and to make it relevant in the future? And then to think about the how, like how are funders, foundations and other funders making decisions? How do they select? What kind of support they provide? So hopefully we'll get questions from you. I'm going to introduce the panelists, but leave you with two questions for you all to start thinking. The first is, what are the main gaps? What are the main gaps in terms of funding? What's needed that isn't quite happening today to maintain journalism's relevance for the future, make it future-proof, and make it stronger today? So gaps in funding. And then I want you to think of kind of one time where you were just having a conversation with a funder and you were like, wow, this is great. Like, I want more funders to behave like this. So have a think. We'll come back to this. So I've got four representatives of four different foundations that support media. They're quite different. They'll all say a few words about how they approach funding media and journalism. I have Ebru Agun from the Adesium Foundation, Miguel Castro from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Mary Fitzgerald from the Open Society Foundations, and Abhijit Das from the, I'm not going to try in Dutch, the Democracy and Media Foundation, forgive me. Before we hear your questions, I just want to give you all like a couple of minutes for just an opening statement. And I'd love to hear like what's top of mind for you in trying to be the best funder that you can be. And kind of what does that mean for you? And what are the kind of questions that you're still thinking a lot about and trying to answer? And then we'll hear from you all. So prepare your questions, please, and remarks. Ebru, can I start with you, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. And thank you all for being here. It's good to see so many, for me, new faces. I work at Adesium Foundation, which is a family foundation based in the Netherlands. We fund multiple topics, and one of the 9 is journalism. And the rationale behind funding journalism for us is that an informed citizen is an engaged citizen. So in order for us as citizens to make informed decisions and ideally be democratically engaged, we need to consume quality information. So what does this mean concretely on what we fund? On the one hand, we support the production and distribution of cross-border collaborative investigative journalism in Europe. So it's a bit of a narrow interpretation of what quality information is. And in supporting this, what we really focus on is those parties that coordinate and produce these kind of investigations. But we're also aware that those who join the investigations, so those who provide the national perspectives, also need to be supported. And unfortunately, we don't have the budget to support all of them individually. So we try to do that through a pooled fund called Civitates. So currently there are 11 grantees there that receive funding, and we try to fill that gap in a responsible manner in that way. And our second set of organizations that we support are those that safeguard and foster the role of journalism. So on the one hand, we try to support those that provide an infrastructure that enables collaborations on an ad hoc basis outside of these large-scale investigations in a secure manner. And the last set of things that we support are organizations that provide emergency support mechanisms, because we're aware that also in Europe, pressure on journalism is rising. There are too many forms of harassment, and for now we've prioritized SLAPs, countering SLAPs. On how we fund, we provide multi-annual funding, core funding, and I'm sure that the journalists in this crowd will know that that's partially because we want to preserve the editorial integrity of journalism, but it's also because we believe that those who we fund are the experts, and we don't need to create projects on how to improve that content or anything. But what we do get more involved in a guiding manner is making sure that the organizations are strong in order to make sure that the expertise can flourish more. Before closing this, one thing that I ask myself and also want to ask you is how to fund with a limited budget collaborations as responsibly as possible. So we're aware that there are multiple layers that are involved in these kind of cross-border collaborations, and we can't support all. So I'm wondering how that can be done in the most fair manner. But also any other blind spots that you identify that you would like to raise or things clarified, I'd be very happy to hear that.
Thank you, Ebru. Miguel, can I come to you next?
Absolutely. Miguel Castro, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we have a portfolio of grants and a foundation-wide strategy of media grant making. And answering one of the questions that you posed to the audience, the reason why we have a fund as such in the Gates Foundation is very clearly what we identify as a gap, which is to address the market failure of journalism in many geographies, and we work with on reporting on issues around global health, global development, gender equality, poverty eradication, and other areas. So we've clearly identified there's plenty of journalism organizations and journalists who want to address and target and task themselves with providing the authoritative journalism that is necessary to inform societies, leaders, and communities about the things that we consider are really important, especially in lower middle income countries. And that was the reason primarily of developing this portfolio that has been going on for 11 years. And we do that through largely through two mechanisms. One is we provide support to what we call authoritative news and information outlets, who are outlets mostly commercial, mission-driven, who have large audiences and influence in the societies in which they operate. And we give them the opportunity with our resources to do in-depth reporting about some of these issues. And the second model is a little bit more technical, niche, subject matter expert media on more targeted areas around global health, development, poverty, and lately quite a lot around gender equality. And I wanted to. There's a few areas we have an opportunity, and we've enjoy the opportunity to research key areas that are important for us, that inform our strategy, that makes us closer to the communities that are deeply involved in these areas. And I want to highlight them in here, maybe for the questions after, but if not, I want to leave those tidbits in here. One is things that are important for us is solutions and constructive journalism. So we invest heavily on new approaches to journalism that are intended to give audiences agency and provide constructive approaches to storytelling. I think is fairly evident. I don't think no one would discuss or argue the fact that a lot of the journalism that exists and people consume is quite crisis-driving, heavily political and politicized, or focusing on giving extra emphasis to famine, crisis, wars, etc., etc. Especially one about reporting on lower and middle income countries. The second one is impact. We've been an organization known and very obsessed with understanding the value of journalism and working with media organizations and journalists and experts. In fact, there is an expert that we work very closely with who is in a panel right now in another room talking about how to demonstrate the social value of journalism, because we very quickly realize that journalism, and I'm a journalist myself, in my own career I can say that that journalism hasn't been able to demonstrate its own value, hasn't had the tools or the opportunities or the resources, and most often media organizations underreport the role they play in society. We know it anecdotally, you know it when you see it, and we're trying to build some science behind that. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is similar to what Abru was saying, is we've seen incredible success on what we call, and others call, academics as well, cross-field collaboration, and it's the formal relationships between journalism organizations and civil society organizations, and how that collaboration can lead to the depth and the substance of reporting that we believe changes whatever we are trying to change, awareness, attitudes, behaviors, or just raising information levels. And we're definitely, I mean, there's a question for the room as well, looking for ways of we as donors incentivizing that cross-collaboration between civil society and journalism, and that very complicated space where journalism and advocacy come together, and what are the rules and what things you can't do, etc., because when journalism does that and when civil society has journalism on their side is when we are more impactful. So yeah, that would be it.
Thank you, Miguel. Can I go to you, Mary, next?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Fitzgerald. I have a strange job title. I'm the Director of Expression at OSF, at the Open Society Foundation. What that actually means is that I inherited 3 portfolios that used to be separate programs. One was a program on independent journalism. One was the information program, so on tech justice and tech accountability. And the third was culture and art. And now it's one team, which I think is very interesting. And I'll explain why. I mean, previously OSF had a culture and art program that supported photographers and documentary makers, and it had a journalism program which supported journalism, which doesn't make any sense, right? How we tell stories is so multifaceted. And the reason why we brought the tech piece in is that technology has completely changed our industry and is transforming our society. So it makes sense to think about these things together. I'm a former journalist. I used to run Open Democracy, which is an awesome, fierce nonprofit based in London, but it's a global news organization. And the question I really wanted to ask all of you was, what is it that you all need that you could share? So the reason why I stopped doing journalism, which is super fun, and became a funder, is because I felt as though there were things that I needed and that we needed in order for us all to succeed, for more of us small independent outlets to get bigger and to be more successful, more sustainable, more impactful. That was never going to work no matter how many philanthropic dollars went into journalism. If philanthropy was just picking winners, just picking certain organizations, sometimes just based on privilege and networks and all those other things. But instead, can philanthropy really listen to and hear what all of you need and you can share? So that I mean, I spent ages talking to a fellow CEO about whether or not we could share a manager of HR, right, when we got to a certain size. But more than that, technology, security, legal services, the finance, admin, the really unsexy bread and butter stuff that actually makes organizations sustainable and resilient. So that's my question to you, is what do you need? At one point, actually, I remember I was speaking to a funder and I said, you know what, do you know any good PR firms? And he said, actually, there's one that's okay. We have an account. Do you want to use them? Right, so it's stuff that you can all share, so that we're not just picking winners and making bets on some and not others. To add to that, I know that there's been, probably you're all aware there's been a lot of change at OSF recently, but I wanted to let you all know that expression is part of global programs. So we deal with threats, challenges, opportunities that show up in more than one place. That's our MO. We have regional programs that fund specific outlets. One of my colleagues here is in the room from the Europe program. So the grants are made not through my team to specific outlets doing great work in specific regions, but we are trying to figure out how we can resource and invest in either tools or tactics or investigative journalism networks that are cross-border, that show up in more than one place or have potential use or application in more than one place. So that's my question to you, is what do you need? What could you share? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary. So now it's not only about asking questions. I'm going to go to Abhijit, but you know you have questions being asked to you. So how to fund responsibly collaboration and incentive more collaboration? What is it that you need and can share? We'll come back to those. Abhijit.
Hi, I'm Abhijit Das. I work at Stichting Democratie en Media in Dutch.
That's what I said.
Exactly. So either people can't pronounce my name or the place I work, basically. It's one or the other. So some of you might not know us, I presume. We're an Amsterdam-based foundation with ties that go back to the Second World War. A legal resistance newspaper, Het Parool, was started during the Second World War, and that has, throughout the decades, grown into the largest publishing house in the Netherlands. We're still shareholders in that publishing house or media corporation, but we've divested partly, and we use part of the funds and capitals we've gained in that way to invest in independent journalism, democracy, and the rule of law. I guess the unique thing about our foundation is that we're fully autonomous, so the capital is fully in our own foundation, and it gives us a lot of freedom, but also a large responsibility, we feel, to actually leverage our autonomy. So how we try and do that is firstly by being as flexible as possible. We make our grants in whichever way works best. We look for people in our network. We do thematic calls. We always have an open box on the website through which people can put in ideas. So we never want to have a closed shop. So it's open to everyone. My colleagues probably won't be happy I'm mentioning this, but I'm on holiday next week. So, so we try to be flexible in the way we make grants. We use our convening power to bring together people to create solutions. We're also flexible in the grants we offer. So we do core funding, we do project funding, we do everything from €1,000 grants to individuals, to larger grants to large NGOs. So the flexibility is, I think, our core. And we try and seek out projects which are risky or other funders try and stay away from. So for instance, what we've done is we've set up a fund for journalism in Suriname, and a space where very few funders operate, and we felt there's a need there for journalistic work, very simple, just news stories basically. So we've funded a new fund there. We've set up a fund for citizen movements, so small grants again for citizens who want to organize themselves and come fight for their rights basically. Got other funders involved in that. So we're looking to innovate and create new solutions, basically. So that's something we're always on the lookout for innovative new solutions. And that's the same in the area of journalism. We don't have one very specific focus. I sometimes joke we don't have a strategy. That's a joke only funders can make, I presume. Not journalists who come to funders. I'm very conscious of that. So one thing we're trying to focus on now more is the root causes and the long-term issues of why journalism is in such a hard space. Even in the Netherlands, trust in journalism is not at a great point. So we're just looking into the causes and what we can do in the longer term to get out of this place. So not only doing what all of you do fantastically, but what else can we do? So, for instance, journalists, perhaps aren't the best at showing society why their work is so valuable. So, we try and get together with journalists to talk about how can we show society, make it clear that the work is crucial and valuable that's going on. leadership is another issue which we're focusing on. So we're looking at the long-term changes, perhaps, at least in the Netherlands, which we can work on. We fund in Netherlands, in Europe, globally, mainly in Netherlands, in Europe. Yeah.
Thanks, Abhijit. So now we'll come to you. Questions, remarks, and answers to the questions that have just been asked. Wow, that's a lot. I prepped a lot of backup in case everybody was asleep. I didn't need to do that. So we'll, just a couple of kind of housekeeping stuff before. If I can ask you to just say who you are, where you work, organization and country.
Should we take a few at a time?
Yeah, exactly. And then we're going to take like 3 or 4 at a time and try and bundle them in ways that make sense. If you could favor questions that are not kind of super specific to one organization, I think that'd be most useful to all of us. And that's it.
I got the mic.
You got the mic.
I'm
Go for
claiming
it.
my space. Hi, my name is Sanne Schim van der Loof. I'm the managing director at Arena for Journalism in Europe. And among other things, we're incubating a self-organized European network of independent news media publishers. And actually the gap, you talked about the gap in the European scene, and what we're hearing a lot from the people we work with is actually that national organizations and funding of local organizations. And I heard 3 people talking about cross-border collaborations. It's great. I'm a big fan of cross-border collaborations. But how do we support those organizations that actually need the local support?
Thank you. Can we stay in the back of the room for a second, and then we'll come to the group in front, just to make it easier. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Mutwakkil Khairi from Sudan, Bukra, a TV station from Sudan. I believe, if you didn't hear, a country that is in a crisis mode at the moment. What do we need from the donor is simplification. Things are complicated to process, the grant that we get from you guys. We often found ourselves in a cash flow trap situation where we have to meet your demands and of course do all the reportings, but when you're operating from countries of disaster in a situation where it's very hard to get all the reports, get all the documents that the auditors want, it's become very tough and difficult for us. And helping us to scale, we're ambitious, of course. We want to do the good for the people. The journey of transformation is not that easy journey for third world countries under dictatorship regimes. It's not as simple and straightforward as in the first world. It's very hard back in Africa. That's all.
Thank you for these questions. Maybe here and there, the lady on the other side. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eliza. I run CNN's gender reporting team, which is Gates funded. I'm coming to this panel with 2 lives in mind. I left The Guardian to start my own platform focusing on African women's stories, and now I'm in what would, most people in this room would consider a very privileged position. And yet my challenges with funders remain relatively the same. In that actually, when I was trying to do my own thing, I was invited into a lot of spaces, but actually not given any of the sort of support to be in the place, very much like the colleague who spoke earlier, where, your voice is welcome, but actually there is no funding for the types of things you do. It felt very much like the funding to tech startups, where, someone has joked that the startups that get money are the ones that help young men do the things their mothers used to do. And so then those of you who are trying to solve structural issues, you are happy, we want you, you're the DEI, but you are not getting any money. And even while I'm at CNN, the idea of how we make what is happening to 51% of the world's population a subject that is taken seriously within newsrooms and not sort of instrumentalized as in, we're just trying to help more women get access to pads, or, that actually it is core journalism, the lives of, women and gender diverse people. I'm always, because of these lives, chasing funding and not knowing, how we can actually transform the industry. And it seems to me that there is a missed opportunity with philanthropists to really take advantage of their centralized role. Now, you're not peripheral anymore in the media industry. There is a market failure, and we are engaging with you. And the questions, the power that you can leverage to actually change fundamentally what the industry does, as opposed to, this idea of backing winners. And it just looks, from where I'm standing, like you're helping the descendants of the winners just have better tools to keep being the ones who are centralized, right? And I'm more interested in sort of changing that makeup entirely.
Great, thanks. I suggest we pause here. There's a lot already. So questions on funding transformation rather than winners, and how can philanthropy do that? Making it simpler, I think we've all heard that many times. We're all trying, but clearly it's not enough. So what more can be done to make it easier, simpler for grantees, and more aligned with their needs, right? Whether it's the point on cash flow, whether it's the point Eliza just made. And then funding local media organizations. There's a lot of research that show that trust tends to be much higher in local media outlets. Yet we're hearing a lot that the funding tends to go towards other things. So how do we solve that conundrum? Who wants to start? Mary.
I just wanted to start because having until quite recently been a grant seeker, I hear deeply everything that you are saying. Everything from the complexity of the funding application process, which has had me tearing my hair out for many years. And I will say that OSF is actually looking at trying to simplify that. The reason also why it's so complicated is because OSF has been under attack for decades. So we have to go through insane amounts of compliance and legal and all the rest in order to protect you as well. But we really are trying to simplify that. I also hear the point that, and I often say this to my colleagues, like, you want to fund the Rolls-Royce, right, the ICIJ, but all the bits of the engine that make the ICIJ or OCCRP or Forbidden Stories or whoever, you won't be able to drive the car if the whole engine isn't working. And that is the theory. So that yes, we fund global networks and infrastructure, but we do have regional programs and teams that do fund local and regional and national journalism. Another big thing that we do support is experiments in business models, because even if we do get a lot of our funding decisions right and support fantastic organizations, which it's a real privilege to do, we're never going to be able to do as much as there is a need for. And so trying to figure out ways that journalism can become more sustainable has been a long-term priority. And yeah, I mean, we haven't cracked that one yet, but there are some really interesting experiments and stories of success out there, which I'd be happy to share more about. I also had to chase funding for many years for what's happening to 51% of the world, and really happy to talk to you afterwards about many of the other funders that I found who don't necessarily fund journalism, but fund gender or sexual and reproductive rights. So happy to open the Rolex. I do see our job, and it's really interesting actually, because I thought I was doing fundraising before and now I'm doing funding. I'm still doing fundraising, right? I'm still having to make the case internally for the work and for the budget. And I'm also trying to bring other colleagues along with me and with us and collaborate so that what we're actually doing together adds up to more than the sum of the parts. So yeah, if you're ever interested in stepping into this world, don't think that it's going to not involve fundraising, because it still does.
Miguel?
Yeah, was one thing, I think it applies to a couple of questions, but it's directly responding to Eliza. I think we are peripheral. I definitely think we are peripheral. So if we look at the size of our grant for the gender reporting in CNN compared to the budget of Time Warner, we are a tiny dot. So, and across the media organizations that we work with, and I think in the generally in the media industry, what philanthropy does is in the hundreds of millions compared to a maybe multiple $billion industry. So that influences a lot of the work we do and how we do it. So the ability of philanthropic organizations, maybe in the US, there's some movement in that direction to positively influence local journalism is directly proportional to the amount of funds. One of the reasons why we have only started to do local journalism very recently was resources, the limited budget that we have available. And if we have now embrace local journalism in a way that we didn't in the past, was because the realization of, for many of us, including within the journalism industry, of the role of the decrease of high-quality local journalism in some beats, like science journalism across the world. Science journalism at a local level doesn't exist anymore, and I mean, it's plenty of evidence about the role of that in the growth of myths and disinformation over the last 3 or 4 years, especially around science. So you see that correlation between the absence or the lack of quality science journalism, or journalism about, in our case, we're interested on public health and global health, and the machinery of myths and disinformation that then drives conversations globally, even beyond the own language that is produced on. So it's kind of like the need that goes beyond the political value of journalism and the investment on that has led us to think that we should go back to pick those markets where local journalism can be an effective trigger of the high quality journalism, engaging journalism, timely and relevant, that you need to kind of like pre-bank a little bit of the disinformation that is going on out there.
I think I hear 2 points. The first point on the support organizations need, besides financial support, I think is very substantial. So I think what we, at least as an organization, try to do is offer any kind of non-financial support you would need. So that could be anything from marketing to leadership training to safe environment internally. So I think that's something, at least we're seeing more and more, which might be valuable. So it's not only about growth or sustainability, but it's also just about creating the circumstances to be able to do your work. I think, and I hope that that is something that's considered to be valuable. If that's not, I'd be glad to hear how we could do that better. And I think I agree, like, despite the role, how large or small philanthropy is, I do feel, at least we do feel that philanthropy does have a responsibility that goes beyond giving grants. So, for instance, the tariffs that are paid to journalists when articles are bought from, investigative journalists or whatever, I do feel philanthropy could move towards a direction where there's more discussion on the role we have to play there as well when we fund certain organizations. So I do think that's a fair point at a more like an industry level, that philanthropy could perhaps take some more responsibility in driving those discussions and work together as several foundations, I guess, to put some issues on the agenda which might be harder for individual outlets to do so. So I definitely hear that point.
Ebru, do you agree with the increased role philanthropy should play in kind of transforming the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that we have to, within philanthropy, hold each other accountable. We need to talk more with each other about how we can maybe also streamline things more. So very concretely on financial reports that are quite bureaucratic and complex, and every funder has a different template, or some don't have a template and say, oh, we're one of those. Report however you feel comfortable, which sometimes is also overwhelming. So I think there's quite some input for us to discuss at the next JFF meeting regardless. But what I can maybe recommend is, sometimes I've at least caught myself in that mistake, is that we introduce ourselves as a flexible funder, but then don't really spell out what this flexibility means. So sometimes towards the end of a grant period, I find out that our grantee was completely unaware that I wouldn't have minded if we postponed the reporting deadline, or the fact that they could have just simply shared a report that they shared with another funder with us. That would be completely fine. So what I would recommend with those who do claim to be flexible, who are not very strict with their project funding, to, in the beginning, when you have your donation agreement, to have a discussion on what the exact expectations are. I have one partner who's convinced all of their funders to receive the same annual report. So perhaps those kind of conversations can, at least, once you do have the funding, make it a little bit easier.
Thanks. I think that's great advice. More honest conversations is what you're suggesting. Thank you. Let's take another round. One in the back, and then here, and here in the front.
I'm Chief of Association of Regional Publishers of Ukraine. I work with regional newspapers and sites and regional journalists who are keep doing their job, do it in the world. And my question is, do you have any ideas, views on strategic long-term support of the press freedom in the middle of Europe? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna. I am a director of a media organization in Croatia. And my question is, it's maybe going to sound a little bit weird, but it's about your audience. So I guess, so this is my question. Sometimes we get all the harassment that organizations that are funded by OSF or the Gates Foundation without actually getting the money. So, which is kind of bad. I guess being harassed because you are getting your money is also bad, but this is worse because it's the same thing without the money. So my, my question is, have you considered when you kind of propose what your funding is and why you fund, how to kind of try to reach broader audiences, not just media, not just NGOs, but actually our audiences and the broader society? Are you thinking of how maybe you could try and improve and better explain what you do and how you support editorial independence and what you actually do to make their lives better, not just ours, I mean, not photographs concretely, but if you could, you would, or if you can, sure, but like, are you thinking about our audiences, not just our organizations? That's my question. That's the gap that I see.
That's a great question, thank you. Can we come to the front? The gentleman right here has been quite dynamically raising his hand, so please.
I appreciate that. I'm Tom Torrid. I'm executive director of a new nonprofit, Sudi, and focusing on climate journalism. We're in a very fortunate position. We've just received support from a foundation that does not traditionally fund journalism, and it's been a very interesting process working with them to help them try and understand better the social value of journalism and why journalism might help them achieve some of their goals for the rest of their climate portfolio. And so my question is, how can we as beneficiaries and how can you as funders bring along more philanthropy that doesn't traditionally support journalism, doesn't inherently understand the value of journalism? How can we be making a better case so that we can grow more support for the many, many worthy projects and organizations that are here in the room?
Great, thank you. Let's answer those and we'll take a next round. Mary, I'm going to come to you on that question of communicating directly to audiences and explaining what you're doing for societies overall. And then Abhijit and Ebru, I know you've been co-chairing the JFF, and one of its mission is to do exactly what you've just said, right? Which is to bring others that are not traditional journalism funders to consider funding journalism and media. So I want to hear ideas on how to do this even better. Mary.
Thank you for the question about audience. It is absolutely central to our strategy and our mission. We only support organizations that have really strong focus on audience, and one of the reasons why we support non-profits like the one I used to run, Open Democracy, is because many of them access lots of diverse audiences through their relationships with other media. So we don't just want to be speaking to the filter bubble. When I was at Open Democracy, a lot of the reporting we did on the dark money that funded the Brexit campaign, we deliberately placed that with right-wing Brexit-leaning newspapers because we wanted the people who voted to leave the European Union to know how that campaign was financed. So I think making sure that we do get out of our filter bubbles or echo chambers is central to kind of my work as a journalist and an editor, but also central to our thinking and to our strategy. But I think what I also heard you say was, can you do more about your reputation, please? Because it sucks. And it's really, really hard. It makes it really hard whether you get Soros funding or not. And interestingly, we really concluded this, that actually many organizations that we might consider funding or not consider not funding because of the reputational attacks would just rather get the money because they're getting the reputational attacks anyway, right? I am really fortunate not to be the director of communications at OSF right now, and I do not envy them their job, because it's been a nightmare. But I think that as an organisation, we are certainly reflecting on how to take a different posture with this, and being more public about the work that we're proud to support is part of that. Of course, there's plenty that we can't talk about because it would endanger people, but being more public about the work that we can support is definitely part of our strategy as well. Like last World Press Freedom Day, I wrote an op-ed for The Guardian and quoted many of the fantastic people I'd heard in Perugia talking about why World Press Freedom is so important and why we were proud to support it. So we're doing what we can, but it is an unenviable task, and I think Miguel probably has this experience too.
Yeah, I mean, we as an organization, we are entirely shamelessly outcomes driven. So it's all about what the audience needs. So we started the portfolio quite agnostic. So we did at one point documentary, behavioral change communication. We tried it all until over the life of the portfolio, and as we understood and we were able to see the role of journalism, that we came down what we are right now, which is 95% journalism. So, and we work with journalism organizations that understand their role and kind of like that Venn diagram of what we care about and what journalism organizations care about is the service that journalism plays to societies and to your audiences. So for us, it's pretty fundamental. So if there is one day any other type of mechanism to inform and engage audiences and help societies make the right choices about health behaviors, social behaviors, the value of democracy, etc., we would fund it. But right now, we believe that journalism online journalism especially is the right, for the level of resources that we have available for this, the right tool. And that is why we do it. We're not in the business of saving journalism. Totally outcomes driven, very happy to do that.
Thank you. A lot of us have been thinking about how to bring others to the table. Do any of you want to share like how that's going to work and how quickly and how we're going to get more funding to go to all the great work that's being done?
I think the first answer to the first part of that question is that it doesn't go that fast. I think it's a long, ongoing conversation that either people such as yourselves are doing to convince funders that journalism is an important tool that they can add to their toolbox in achieving their goals. But I think particularly the foundations I'm in touch with, we very frequently meet up together and talk about the other new foundations we hear that are popping up, especially in our own country, that's easier to access, to meet up, constantly exchange portfolios, try to find angles where journalism could fit into their strategies as well. So I think it's an ongoing conversation that we have. On the other hand, I think in the Netherlands it's easy to talk because journalism is becoming much more popular within philanthropy. So there it's also easier for us to find the connection. So I would say that my predecessors have done a pretty good job in getting that conversation started at first. In JFF, what we try to do is we have a couple of foundations from a couple of countries, but we're still a very small group that needs to expand. But we all try to convince each other to talk with other like-minded foundations to also start including journalism. So it's many talks going on, and sometimes also including some of our partners to see if they can maybe explain the situation better than we can, because at some point, of course, we become a little bit repetitive. So I think, yeah, that's how we're trying to do it. I myself am trying to get more core funding into journalism, but I also have colleagues at Adesium who also want journalism for their topics, particularly to get their strategic goals achieved. So they are also kind of advocates, even though they don't focus on journalism, they're also going around at conferences that are not dedicated to journalism, but completely other topics, to at least bring in some thematic funding.
Yeah. Abhijit, do you want to add anything? And then can we get the mic up front to the person in blue and then on the first row, please?
I think a very brief point on bringing in other funding is, as more experienced funders, also feel we have responsibility to make clear that funding journalism is something specific, which also has certain ethical perspectives, and you can't instrumentalize the work of journalists that's going on. So I think that's at JFF a perspective we try and bring in as well, it's good to bring in other people, but we try and, well, I wouldn't say educate, but at least give the perspective of what funding journalism means. So that's something we would gladly work together with on, if that could be helpful.
Thanks. I realized there was another question on kind of long-term strategy for Ukraine and center of Europe. I feel we won't do justice to this question in just a couple of minutes, and we all have different views. I might encourage, this is one we kind of pick up separately with people that are really active in the region. And I'd love to add just a few more, if that's okay. I think, yeah, you have the mic.
Hi, my name is Rona Maya. I have about 20 years seeking grants, managing grants, and my recommendations come from that. I'm looking at the question, what are the gaps in funding? So we need funding that is not rooted in or tied to geopolitics and colonial history. A lot of the inequalities you see is because it's almost as if funders are forced to do projects only in the countries that they colonized. And I think you miss a big opportunity when you don't widen the pool. You also reinforce news deserts when you do that. So I think this discussion needs to happen when you talk to each other about where are we actually reinforcing colonial stereotypes. The second thing is, I think funding, we need funders and philanthropy that is relevant to what Africa's media consumption landscape is. A lot of funding continues to go to the new shiny digital things. And community radio is suffering. Community radio is where we get all our news. I'm speaking for Africa, by the way. So I think we need to have funding that is relevant to that. I'm pretty sure radio and audio is also what happens in parts of Asia as well. And then lastly, often journalism funding focuses on sustainability. We've heard the words here, buzzwords, revenue and all of that. I want to see funding that focuses on the sustainability of the human being producing the journalism. There's a lot of horrific inequalities going on in collaborative journalism, especially collaborations that happen between Africans and non-Africans. And it almost appears as if funders are funding evil, trauma, extractive behavior. As somebody who manages a grant, I know it is possible to concern yourself with the production of that journalism. How is it ethically produced? You know, you can be writing about sweatshops, but then you overworked a journalist and they suffered a mini stroke. This is a real situation going on. So I think if there are processes that can make people concern themselves, funders, with how the journalists are being handled, that would also help. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you. And that last point resonates so much. I've heard this so much over the last couple of days. Like, yes, think about audiences, but think about the people writing, talking on radio, actually producing the news. So thank you for raising it.
Hello, my name is Camille Padilla Dalmau. I'm the founder of an organization in Puerto Rico. And very aligned with what Rona was saying, we're thinking a lot about journalism in the lens of health. How do we communicate in a way that is healthy for our communities? And my question is more about, if you're thinking about non-traditional ways of measuring impact, because that's something that we're thinking in our newsroom, not just about the views or the reach, but the actual quality of the interaction that people have with the information that we offer. So just wondering what are some, if you're thinking about that, and what are some of that impact that is non-traditional. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get the last one from the front? I know we only have 1 minute left. I feel this one, Miguel, you've been thinking a lot about this. I feel this is a panel for next year. How do we assess impact in non-traditional ways as well as counting views?
It's happening right now in another
Oh, sorry. Final one here, please.
Hi, so I'm Corinne Podger and I've worked in capacity strengthening for about 10 years. I wanted to respond to Mary's question, actually, which is what can we do to share? So I think one of the things, and in fact, speaking to beautiful Ruona, oh, I love that woman, this point about decolonizing, is to expand the JFF model outside Europe, right? There are a lot of people here from Africa, but also from Asia Pacific. The SPICE people have to come here to have these conversations with funders. And in fact, you guys could be capacity strengthening funders and funding fora outside Europe. And that would go some way to address the problem that Rowan has mentioned. There was just one other thing I wanted to mention here, which is, you know, when you think about what to share, I do a lot of consulting training. I try and be really quick, but you know, I constantly feel like I'm recreating resources that already exist. You know, climate change handbooks, resources on, you know, the gentleman from Sudan, templates, budgets, all of these things. There should just be a pack that you can just go and download. You know, it's nuts. And training materials, I rewrite content all the time that I've done 5 or 10 times for different implementing agencies. We can achieve such economies of scale and then free up funds to do other things if donors talk to each other about the resources that are being created. The end.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'll end with a plea, which is just 12 seconds. This side of the room and that side of the room. Let's continue those conversations, not only in Perugia, not only in panels. Let's continue this as part of the day-to-day interactions that we have. Let's create the space for more honest conversations and hearing more from you needs, how you perceive what we do as funders. And on our end, let's create that space. Thank you, everyone.